Mark. Appreciate it. Let me add my thanks to everyone for coming and attending this thing tonight. As Mark said, he and I have been working together quite a bit over the last couple of years. Our paths keep crossing. Mark works more in membership than I do. Probably two good questions arise from the title slide. Well, we got a stewardship guy talking about membership here. And what is membership myopia? Well, to answer the first question, I've been a stewardship consultant with the UUA for about 3 years now. And every year I get more and more convinced that the symbiotic relationship between membership and stewardship really is an intertwined and an interesting relationship. If one doesn't do well, the other suffers in both directions. I've spent a fair amount of time and energy taking note of what seems to be working in some congregations and what's not working in others. And so what I thought we might do was share some of that tonight. The membership myopia title came out from the idea, I've been struck, and you folks who are in the membership portfolio would be more aware of this than I am. I'm struck how often when you ask people, so what does the membership committee do, or what's the membership ministry in your congregation? Very often it comes down to, we do greeting. We focus on greeting new visitors coming in. And of course, that's an important but a very small part of what goes in the membership arena. So that's why you've got a stewardship guy talking with you. And I'm grateful for you giving me an opportunity to talk to you a bit tonight. And that's the myopia we're talking about. So with that as a bit of an introduction, here's what I thought we'd do tonight. I'd like to share with you some things that I've seen, what I've learned working across the country. My experience varies from congregations of between 400 and 600 and several congregations that are in the low dozens. I actually worked with one that had a grand total of 24. And it's striking how some membership principles carry across all those sizes of organization, and some are quite different. So I thought I'd share a bit of that tonight. Two things that you'll see permeating the whole discussion tonight. One is the idea of life cycle of membership. That membership has a function to engage that person from the moment they first hit your website, before they ever come in the door, through their time as members until they leave. And people do leave. We'll talk about that a bit as well. And the second theme you'll see tonight is what I call deputizing the team. Making sure everybody in the congregation understands that membership really is a shared function, perhaps more so than anything else we do as a system in a congregation. So with those two sort of framing pillars, if you will, we'll talk a little bit about some things that I've seen that seem to work quite well in a lot of places, some things that don't. And I really do want to make sure we have some time toward the end to make sure that we can share your experiences and observations and answer any questions that we had. As Mark said, the chat box is here on your lower left screen. If you've got something that you feel doesn't wait or you'd like to bring up now, just pass a note in there, and Mark's been deputized to keep track of that screen for us, so we'll see what's coming in. So let's take a look at some general observations, if I could. This should not be anything here that's a surprise to this audience, but I think it's important to lay out, and I spend a fair amount of time in congregations talking to people who aren't, quote unquote, in the membership portfolio, going through these areas. First and foremost, the membership team is pretty well misunderstood in most cases, and is much too narrowly focused in the mind of the congregation. People really do focus on doing that good greeting and don't think much about the rest of the life cycle of membership here. The greeting is important, but it's not going to be enough for us here. The other thing that struck me, I can't remember the last time I visited a congregation that didn't have about the equivalent of 100% of their membership come through their doors in a given year in visitors. We have plenty of visitors, and what we don't have is a large number of people deciding to return a second and third time and becoming members here. That's a somewhat different process, and we'll talk about that a little bit later tonight here. I'm always surprised when congregations and the leadership don't realize the value of being on the membership team as leader development. There are 3 or 4 committees or portfolios in every congregation that I think are just really important if you're trying to grow somebody you think is going to be a great board president in 4 or 5 years, for example, or just going to be one of those real pillars of the congregation. one of the places I really like to see them take a turn through is be part of the membership team. It just teaches them to see the congregation in completely different ways, very often with a visitor's eyes, and that's a very useful thing to do here. And then finally, just to echo something I said at the very outset here, how intertwined these key functions are here. Stewardship campaigns and recruitment by the nominating committee or the nominating team tend not to go real well if membership's not functioning. More times than not, when I find one of those first two is having problems, when we drill in a little bit and ask some questions and make some connections, we find it goes back to a membership function, and vice versa. If you have really inept, heavy-handed, guilt-ridden, not very effective stewardship campaign, that's a really tough place for a membership committee to try to do healthy membership development. So there really is a synergy here, and they're all truly connected. I've spent a lot of time lately in a lot of congregations that tell me the dividing line, if you will, between the stewardship committee and the membership committee just gets smaller and more porous every year. Been to a number of congregations where they actually swap members. There is a liaison member from membership and stewardship and vice versa. They rotate people on a regular basis. Why don't you spend a couple years in membership, take a break, and go spend a couple years over in stewardship? And those bodies frequently meet quarterly or semi-annually, just sit down together as a collective team, share intelligence, share ideas, talk about what your needs are, recruiting members and leaders inside your organization. So keeping that synergy going really is an important element here. So let's talk a little bit about what I call the life cycle of membership. Don't think the audio is going to work with this one. That was our one technical trick today. We actually had the little theme song from the cycle of life, or the circle of life here. I was going to play for you here, but that doesn't seem to want to play here, so we'll go past on the visual here. This, from the layman's point of view, is the way I have come to think about what the cycle of membership is. And it starts right there from the top. When somebody is potentially interested in your congregation, they're trying to find you, and they're trying to determine if you might be a community they'd like to be a part of, and then going clockwise all the way around to the various steps, and we'll walk through each one of these. But when someone says membership to me, this is the mental image I have, not what's happening right now, but what happened before people joined, what's happening while they're here, and what do we do when somebody leaves the congregation. Those are all membership functions. And I find a lot of membership committees just really haven't thought about that whole life cycle before, and when you do, congregation really benefits from it. Let's talk a little bit about attraction from afar. This should be information that's pretty familiar to you, but worth going over as a fundamental piece. The first one is, who does your website speak to? Most congregations I visit, visitors still find you from the website, although increasingly that's a connection that they found through social media. Somebody mentioned your congregation or service or something you're doing in social justice on a Facebook page or on Twitter, and that led them to your website, and that in turn led them to you. There's a bit of a dichotomy in terms of what your website does, and that's a regular fight that everybody has to follow from time to time. Does the website function to serve your existing community, or is it there for the visitor? And of course the answer is yes. It's there for both of them. But my bias is, having visited a lot of congregations and read through more websites than I can count at this point, my bias is to say the website ought to be most friendly, particularly your landing page, to the visitor. I'm looking to see if it's going to do the things we're talking about here. Does it tell me who you are? I may have heard about Unitarian Universalism, but really don't know much about it. Does it tell me where you are? Does it give me a feel for what a Sunday service looks like? Have you made it easy for me to find you electronically? Have you got the kind of words that a Google search is going to help you somebody find you pretty quickly? And is it easy to find you physically? Are there good, clear directions on your website? And are there good, clear directions on the ground? I don't really know the history, but UU churches seem to really excel at hiding ourselves in the woods way off the main road. and it's a little hard for people to find us sometimes. And all of these things we're talking about on the website, does that work just as well on a phone? Because I increasingly see people that are doing this on a tablet or on a phone less often than they're doing it on a full-size computer. And if your website's not scaled to do that, then that's a little tough. I skipped over two items here. Blogs can be extremely important too. If you're a minister in particular, or one of your other portfolio holders is really good at this and can do a good informative blog that people are interested in and will cross-post and pass around in Twitter and mention on Facebook pages, that's a great way for people to get a feel for who you are as well. So having a blog that's linked directly to your website and can get cross-posted over your Facebook page is pretty useful. You'll notice up here I've mentioned Facebook pages and Facebook groups. Two very different functions here, but they both serve membership. Facebook page is essentially open to the world. It's one of your electronic front porches, just like your website is. That makes it easier for people to learn a bit about you and find out who you are and so forth. The Facebook groups tend to be closed and are actually more reserved for your members and for people to come in by invitation. Also serve a very useful function, but they are different functions. And in my personal opinion, there's great value in having both. I spend a fair amount of time in my own congregation on the group page, but or on the group site, but I hit the Facebook page fairly often as well, if for no other reason, just to see how many hits we're getting and see what kind of questions are popping up and what sort of discussions are coming out of that. So that's worth doing. And see, Michelle's got a good comment here. Web surfing is better than 50% mobile these days. Boy, that mirrors my experiences right. I think she's exactly right. Mark's got a good comment there. I hope some of you have seen this as well. I've had to search several pages on the website to find the address, phone number of a congregation. Someone a lot smarter than I once said, when I hit your landing page, I'm looking for a few things that ought to be right there up front. And one of them is how to find you, how to connect with you. I ought to see lots of faces and people, not buildings. I ought to see a lot of white space. If your website landing page, some of ours look like the Rosetta Stone with about 4-point type all the way across here. Not a very welcoming sort of thing. But make it very easy. A number of congregations have a tab that says coming to visit. And you click that, and there's a drill down there. So here's what a service is like. Here's where we are. Here's how to get in touch with us. And being a stewardship guy, the other thing I like to see on your landing page is somewhere that says contribute. But that's another webinar. We'll talk about that later. So what all this means is that most people are, in fact, going to find you electronically first and are probably going to decide if they'd like to come check you out based on that electronic presence. And that means, quite frankly, that having the website run just by volunteers that nobody really watches over is a fairly risky strategy. It's just too important an area to say we'll just get whoever we can to do it. It's worth having some care for your webmaster who pays attention to presentation and security, and having a good service provider to make sure your site stays up. This group, I'm sure, is more aware than most. Probably nothing will drive somebody away faster or worse than an inaccurate, clunky website or one that you go into an area that you're interested in and the last posting was 6 months ago. People tend not to go to a church. If you don't care enough to put out current information and your best foot forward, they're just going to keep looking here. So, what I'm looking for when I look at that website to help that attraction from afar is a site that says to me, this thing is pretty well managed. Somebody is taking care to make sure it's well structured, it's edited, the right kind of things are on there, it's synchronized with your Twitter presence if you've got one of those, your Facebook page, and your Facebook group. It's easy on the eyes, not real hard for me to find what I'm looking for. You know, my amateur experience is the average person when they hit a church website landing page, if they can't find what they're looking for in about the first 10, 12 seconds, they're probably going to go somewhere else. And if they have to click down more than twice to find what they're looking for, they may well give it up as well. And just to reemphasize the point we talked about a moment ago here, the best websites feature your people, not your beautiful building and grounds. I mean, it's great if you got buildings and grounds that are nice, but you're looking for an opportunity for people to connect. They ought to see other people having a good time and doing important things here. So the more faces, the better, and keep that current. Now rotate that around a bit here. So let's talk a little bit of what happens. Let's suppose someone looks at your website or your Facebook page and says, well, that looks like a pretty good congregation. I think I'd like to check them out. So how do we do the greeting? You use, as I think everyone here probably knows, really has a morbid history of doing this. I think we've gotten a lot better, but I've heard some real horror stories over the years. I visited a congregation once, and I've heard this story in other places as well, that the tradition was they passed out bright blue coffee mugs to the visitors. And I saw about 3 or 4 of these mugs over in a corner, and so I went over to talk to them. I said, so you guys are visitors, huh? They said, yeah, you can tell by the mug, right? We figured out the mug means don't talk to these people. All the blue mugs are just talking to each other. And it's not that people meant to be unfriendly, it's just they all get wrapped up talking to the people they know here. So sometimes we unintentionally can be not as welcoming as we'd like to be. When Peter Malice was running his congregation in Colorado, they focused for a couple years on doing the transition from a good greeting to having somebody come back to getting them seriously thinking about, I think I'd like to be a real part of this community here. And they wrote a terrific little guideline for doing that. I think it's been republished a time or two and retitled, but I love the original title. It was How to Drive Not Quite So Many People Away. And I thought that was pretty good stuff here. And they really focused on being intentional and how that goes. We're doing a lot better, I think. I see really good intentional greeting processes in lots of congregations. But we've all still got a ways to go. I encourage you, and if not yourself, ask others in your congregation to come in with a fresh mind once in a while. From the moment you drive in the parking lot, look at your congregation and the process that gets you seating in a chair or in a pew and ask yourself, what was that experience like? How smooth was that? Did I feel like I was greeted without being smothered? How's that process going? Several districts in the past have had the secret visitor program, where the idea you take turns sending people to each other's congregations, and they take notes on what the visitor experience was like and share it back with the host congregation afterwards. I find that still a useful thing to do. And I suspect most of you are familiar with what's referred to as the 2-minute rule. Most visitors into a congregation, within about the first 2 minutes of walking into the commons area, have subconsciously already decided if they're going to come back or not. That's a really striking thing. It just shows you how precious that early time is. So how do we make good use of that? Well, my first rule is I take my guidance from Walt Disney. A few years ago, I was doing a business case study on how you do greeting and how you deal with the public. This is from a private sector perspective. But one of the things I ran across that I just found was fascinating. Every Walt Disney park has a vice president for parking. Now think of that. A corporate officer, a vice president for parking. So I happened to be down in Florida while I was doing the study, so I went to Orlando and I found the vice president of parking. I said, tell me why you're a vice president. Now, it was a real eye-opener for me, he said, because my turf is the first experience you have in this property, and it's the last one. And I want it to be just as good as everything that happens in between. And they actually manage that experience from making sure you could find a parking place to having somebody walking around who is guiding you and say, the door you're looking for is just right over here, or the bus is over here. And then as you came back out, there was a greeter out there say, I hope you had a good time today. I hope you'll come back and see us. And if the parking lot's kind of crowded, look after the newbies and help them back out safely, hopefully back out of some designated visitor spots and get on their way here. But it's a very holistic thing that starts from the moment somebody hits the property. And I thought it was pretty good guidance here. The other system that I really like to see is what I call the tag team or the double play approach. And here's the way this goes. Someone drives up to your parking lot and they'll see a greeter or somebody out there who's just helping people park, and you look like a new person. You roll the window down. So, are you visiting us today? Yeah. Well, welcome. We've got visitor parking right over here. why don't you come on in and I'll guide you in. Front door is just right over here. So that's the first person they've got coming in. They walk into the Commons. There's probably, hopefully, a greeting table or a greeter at the door, or maybe the minister at the door who says, we're really glad you're here, and if you'd like to, why don't you stop by the visitor table for a minute. We'll give you some information and make sure you get properly welcomed here. And they go over to the visitor table. And they may or may not fill out some information. We'll talk about that piece in just a minute here. But for a lot of congregations, that's where it stops. But I've seen a couple of them do a really smart thing. Somebody comes by the visitor table, they get some information packet, and the visiting table is not staffed by one person, but by two or three. And one of those two or three comes out from behind that table and says, come on in, let me introduce you to a couple people. Walk them over, let them shake hands with an usher, and either they or an usher takes them in and says, where do you like to sit? Are you a left side or a right side person? And rather than just letting people wander around, and you don't want to be too directive here, but say, hey, why don't you come over here? The acoustics are pretty good over here, and it looks like there's room for the whole family to sit down. And just let them take a seat, and you tap the shoulder of the nearest member next to, say, Larry, I'd like you to meet Mary and Jane. They're just here visiting today. And your members know that when a greeter does that, all they're asked to do is shake their hand if you got a minute and say, welcome, glad you're here. Got any questions on the service? Feel free to ask us during the service or afterwards. You go through the service, and at the end of that, one of the members, because you've had this conversation in your congregation, turns to the visitors and says, could I buy you a cup of coffee? Come on out and I'll show you where the coffee is here. And you walk them out to the Commons, get them a cup of coffee, and by then, hopefully you've had a bit of a conversation. You lived in this area for a while, or you new here? What brings you here? See if you get, I see you have kids. I think you'd probably like the RE program here. But you've learned a bit about people as you walk over and get a cup of coffee, and then hopefully you've got a bit of information that you could flag down yet one more person and say, Mary, I'd like you to meet Larry and Linda over here. They're visiting us here today. They've got a couple kids about your age. I thought you guys might enjoy talking to each other. So the person who was sitting close to him in the sanctuary just walked him over, had a cup of coffee got a cup of coffee, had about a 2-minute conversation, passed him over to somebody else who's going to talk to him for a minute or two, and then let them go on their way here. The idea of, you're not trying to squash people in, you're not trying to put too many in, but you don't want to just have people wandering around either. It's kind of nice to have 2 or 3 people talk to you for a couple of minutes and then let you wander around for a bit. At the end of that experience, they've had a short but nice conversation with about 6 or 7 people. They've been greeted. They've been shown kind of how the flow works in the Commons. They've met a couple of folks. And when they're ready to go, hopefully somebody will notice that that's a visitor leaving and say, glad you guys came. Thanks for coming in here. That's a great here. Lori's got a good thing here. Always has suggested the greeter squat down and greet the little kids. That's a great suggestion here. A lot of congregations I know, if they can find enough volunteers, have an RE greeter specifically at the table who will do that function as well, and also will say, I'll be out here when if the children in your congregation come in for a part of the service and then leave for RE. They'll say, I'll be waiting out here if you'd like for your kids to go join the RE. You'd like to walk with them, but I'll be happy to show you where they go. But that's a terrific idea here. And if you can match them up with a family that's got some folks about their age, that's a great way to go. So you can see what we've done here for a relay. We've picked people up in the parking lot. Somebody met them at the front entrance. We walked them through the Commons and the welcome table, but we carry that on through the sanctuary, in the coffee area, in the exit. Now, I've got a comment here that says retail versus wholesale. This is always a bit of a controversial area for some folks here. And it's popped up lately in the UU listserv on membership, I've noticed, and in the growth lab as well. How do you greet your visitors in the sanctuary? The wholesale version is somebody from the pulpit says, we welcome all our visitors. If you're a visitor, would you please stand up? Or if you're a visitor, would you raise your hand and introduce yourself? My experience is about half those visitors would rather have dental work without Novocaine than do that. for those of us who are used to talking a lot, it's not that big a deal. But for a lot of people, that's really kind of a scary thing to do. We really don't particularly like doing that. I'm much more a fan of the retail thing where everybody is trained to look for the visitor and say hi. And somebody from the pulpit just says, if you're a visitor, we're really glad you're here today. And we invite you to join us for coffee. And please feel free to ask any questions you have while you're here with us. And we hope to see you again. That's the retail versus wholesale. People have different agreements on that. Like I said, I've never been uncomfortable standing up, but I've seen really pained looks on people's faces when they're asked to do that. So I'm not a big fan of that, but that's just me here. The trick question for your congregation, I've got in the middle of this slide. All of this only works if everybody or almost everybody in the congregation understands the idea of the double play or the tag team or helping people navigate through the congregational site here. And so one of the things I like to do occasionally, our membership director does this pretty well in my congregation. They will occasionally stand up in front of the congregation and say, just to review, who's on the membership committee? And if about 6 or 7 hands come up, they say, all right, everybody who didn't raise your hand, wrong answer. We're all on the membership committee. The spirit ought to be, we've got a really terrific community here. We're proud of it. We feel privileged to be a part of it, and we'd really like to share it with some other people. And so everybody taking some responsibility for, again, not smothering the visitor, but making sure they feel welcome and that there's somebody they can turn to until they're ready to walk out the door. It's really a good thing to do here. All right, let's see. We have some other good comments coming in on the side here. Have children and youth as greeters. Absolutely. Very good thing to do. We also say if you're a visitor, let's talk about that. We also say if you're a visitor, let the basket pass, you're our guest. Often they still donate, but it makes them feel welcome. I'd invite you to look at those same two, look at the Stewardship and the Growth Lab and the UU Leadership Lab. Look at the history of that conversation. Right now on the membership, I think it's the membership or the Growth Lab, there's a really hot conversation going about whether or not one wants to do that or not. You can make a great case for going either way on that. It may actually be on the Stewardship Lab, but I encourage you to take a look at read that and give that some thought. You can have some good discussions. If we ever do a stewardship discussion together, I'd be happy to spend some time on that one here. Greeters in the congregation are introduced, it says on the comments here. Wait for a newcomer at the minister's receiving line at the end of the service, then walk them over to the coffee hour. That's a terrific way to do it, too. I like that. And introducing the greeters is a good idea. There we go. It is on the Stewardship Lab. Thank you. Very good. It has really been a lively conversation, as it always is. That comes up fairly often here. All right, let's talk a little bit about follow-up and engagement. One of the tools we have for doing that is we ask people very often to fill out a visitor's card when they first come in. I'm a big fan of looking at that visitor's card very much as a first-time visitor. Just imagine yourself, I've just walked in, don't really know anybody, don't know the place. I've got one kid in a stroller, one in my arms. My spouse and I just had a lively discussion coming in here. And somebody hands me a card with 37 lines of information and says, please fill this out before you leave. Not a very pleasant experience here. I think we sometimes tend to overload these. So a visitor's card is a terrific thing to do, but you ought to keep it down to the real minimum and make sure they know you ask them to do that just so you can get a feel for what's important to them, what's interesting to them. If there's a place on your card to fill out, say, we'll start sending you the e-news if you'd like to receive it. If not, just let us know. That's fine. But if you wouldn't mind filling the card out while you're here, that'll help us get to know you a bit better. So how do you fill that out and where do you turn it in? If you're fortunate enough to have either chairs or pews that have racks in the back, you can have some of those cards in there so you can hand people cards. So you'll find one of these in the rack also. If you have a moment, fill that out before the service starts or after the service, and you can bring it back to this table, or you're welcome to put it in the offering plate when that goes around. But you want to make it easy for people to fill out. Don't ask too much information. You can always follow up later for additional information. And make sure there's an easy surface for them to write on and something to write with. So we do that. Now, good comment here. Somebody comes in and says, we have the visitor to make a name tag, tell them to enjoy the service, stop back after the service if they like what they heard. pick up a visitor packet and pick up the connection card. Good way to do it as well. I had a nice story the other day. I think most congregations now, or a lot of them, use a different color name tag to make it a little easier for us to pick out the visitor. A lot of our congregations, when you turn that visitor name tag in, notes on the back of the card the last time the person was there. So it's kind of an easy way when you're laying out the visitor name tags looking for the repeaters, you know who's been there for a while. I asked a visitor at one congregation that I was at a while back, said, have you been here before? Yeah, a few times. Really? So you've come more than once. And he pulled off his name tag and says, yeah, it says that I've been here 4 times. So they use it here as well. But the idea of using the visitor's card is a good one, but just be careful about how much you demand in terms of people's information at time. Make sure there's a place to do it here. Lots of good suggestions coming up on the left side. Read those as we go through here, folks. I see a lot of good stuff here going nicely here.
Bill, this is Mark. I just want to jump in real quick. There are great comments along here. There may be some folks that might not be able to see the chat box. So I just want to encourage you, if you would, to continue to read them for those people that might not be able to see it.
That's a great idea.
And I particularly like the comment from Michelle about giving a gift for people in exchange for the visitor card, the little book Welcome with a brochure in it and a label on the back with the church name and web address. What a great idea.
You bet. No, absolutely. It really is here. Somebody says they use mini clipboards for the visitor's card. A lot of us do that, and that does give you a ready-made surface to work for. I usually like having, making sure there's a pen or a pencil with a long string on it there so they don't have to fish for that as well. Yeah, and here's Corey's comment. We hand folks a card. If they get a paper name tag, they take it with them into the service and turn it into the offertory basket if they like to. Yep, that absolutely works well here. And Michelle's comment that Mark alluded to, we've been offering gifts as well, ideally in exchange for the visitor card. It's the book Welcome with a brochure in it and a label on the back with the church name and web address. That is a terrific idea. I really like that. Michelle's okay if I steal that and share that with some other people? That's really a good one. I like that a lot. There's an interesting transition going on these days in communication. Fewer and fewer churches that I visit are doing the traditional newsletter. They're usually doing something linked to the website now, and the weekly email link tends to be the most common means of communicating. Doesn't really make any difference whatever your congregation is doing. I'm assuming that when your visitor comes in, you make sure they know these are the ways we communicate with each other. If you'd like to get these, we'd be happy to send them to you. If you do a blog or anything of that sort and you have an RSS feed, that makes it really easy for them. They get an automatic notice that something new has been posted here. So that's a good thing to do. All right. And okay, good. All right. And Michelle says, in fact, yeah, her visitors have responded very well to the gifts here. That's a good deal. You'd be amazed how cheap you can get a bunch of nice ink pens printed up with the the UU symbol on it, the name of your congregation and website. A lot of congregations give you one of those when you fill out the thing. No, just keep the pen. That's got our website on there. Feel free to use that to contact us here. So let's suppose someone has been to see you a time or two. They're getting the regular email. Looks like they got real potential to be a part of your community. As this audience would know probably better than I, the way people really become part of the community is taking part in something. Sunday morning services are wonderful, but they tend to be a little passive and they're just an hour. I'm a big fan of sweat equity. Give people an opportunity to come in and help out in some manageable thing. Huge difference in the response you get, how you ask people or invite people to come join you on something. What works, in my experience, 90% of the time, I'd say I'm a 30-year-old female single mother. I've got 2 kids that are starting to do RE, and I get a call from somebody who's sort of like that in the congregation and said, you may not remember, we met picking up our kids at RE a couple of weeks ago. We've got a children's film series starting next week. It's on Wednesday night. It's a little potluck dinner, and then we're sitting, the kids are watching a movie. My kids and I are going. We just wonder if you'd like to join us. I'm going to go. Would you like to join us? I can pick you up if you like, or I can drive by and you can follow me so you can head out when you like to. But we're going to enjoy it, and I thought you might as well. Or we're doing our annual book sale. It's a big part of the community here. We ask people to come in for a couple hours on a couple of Saturdays. Just wondered, our conversation, I know you're an avid reader too. Wonder if you might be interested in joining me and helping to sort out books for about an hour and a half on Saturday. Get to know some of the folks. Mark has heard me tell this story before. That's how I joined my current congregation. We had been twice, talked to somebody about books, and they called and said, we're doing a book sale. Would you like to come sort? My wife and I spent a couple hours on a Saturday sorting books and met about 30 people we hadn't met before. And on the way to the parking lot, we said, I think we found our church. Let's join. We did a little sweat equity. We rubbed elbows. We got to talking to people, and we really got a feel for the community. Those two things work really well. There's nothing wrong with sending out general notices or putting things in announcements. I mean, that's perfectly fine, and people do that. But getting it on a personal basis, saying, I'd like to invite you to join me at something we find enjoyable, and or we thought you might like to do a little bit of work with us here. It's just an hour or so, but you'll meet some people. Really does help people get connected early. This is one of the things that Peter found in his congregation early as well. If it's a personal retail kind of ask for something that connects with them, generally ask from somebody that they've connected with and or somebody that sort of looks like them in some way in terms of interest or age or whatever, really makes a big difference here. Next to the last item we've got here on tracking contacts and keeping track of interest. This is a real challenge for congregations, and those of you who are membership professionals know this better than any of us here. The larger your congregation gets, the harder this is to do, but the more important it is. Somebody has to have a skill set that knows how to manage a database. You have to have, once you get past a few dozen folks, you need some kind of an automated system that can do that. And the larger a congregation gets, the better it is if members can directly access some of those interest areas and things they like to volunteer on and input those things directly. That's a whole separate webinar here, but this is just another one of those areas where having somebody who looks at some 3x5 cards a couple times a year just really doesn't cut it anymore. There are a lot of good databases out there that are not terribly expensive, but it does take some time to put it in. Nothing frustrates members more than somebody saying, we'd like to update what your interests are and what you're volunteering in, and they never hear from them again because the data never got entered into a form that it can be used. So there's some work to be done there in terms of labor hours and how much you can or want to spend in managing that data. But it really is important. Once you start tracking how people spend their time on campus, what they're interested in, what they're volunteering for, and what they show up for, you find interesting sub-communities that you weren't aware of before, that existed before, and it's another way for people to connect. You'll find you can start creating small ministries out of groups you might not have thought had anything in common here. And then just kind of a closing note, an obvious piece on this one here. If somebody does volunteer, I'm interested in doing something, or these are skill sets I have, it's really important that somebody get back to them after they volunteered that and say, got that information. Thank you. It's very helpful. We put it in the base here and it's going to be managed. And it really, really, somebody said, so how soon would you like to do something? I've got a couple projects coming up in the next 6 months or so in this area. Could I talk to you about some of those? But let people know you're not asking just for the sake of asking. You really got some needs, and it's an opportunity for them to serve and get to know the congregation a little better. We'll talk about an interesting forum. One of the congregations up in Pennsylvania, up in Mark's neighborhood, developed for doing this. I found it's just been a fabulous tool, but we'll come to that in a couple minutes here. So we've engaged somebody now, and they've joined and they're active in the church and they're doing a couple things here. So now we're at the mid stage here. We're at that development of a member. The membership work doesn't stop just because somebody's joined. It's really just getting started here. For my money, I'm looking for two goals here in the membership process. I want every single member of my congregation to feel like they're enriched by being a part of this congregation. The human contact, the sense of community, the intellectual stimulation, the spiritual growth, they all get that here, and they get it in lots of different ways and lots of different outlets here. And I'm also, quite frankly, looking to grow people who are going to be leaders, who may not be yet. Every year, good congregations sit down a handful of people who are working the leadership development, the nomination process, and they're looking not only to fill the slate this year, but saying, who do you think could really be a leader of a major committee or might want to be on the board 2, 3, 4 years from now, and what might we offer to do with them between now and then so that when they're asked, they're comfortable and they're ready to do that. So membership development is a part of that process here. I refer to that as the farm team model here. So here are some of the approaches I found that work in terms of getting good membership development. One of these is the idea of a mentor for a new group. And some of you have seen this before. A couple of your old hands who've been around for a while, maybe not forever, but they've been around long enough to sort of know where things are and how things work. And people who join in the first 6 months of a year or a year form a cohort. They're the class of 2014. And they have 1 or 2 mentors. So, you folks, we want you to really get to know everything here. We want you to poke in. We want you to ask questions. But if you don't know where else to go, Roger or Mary here is the mentor for your group for the next year in particular. If you need something you don't know where to go, ask them, and they'll either know or, by George, they'll hunt it down for you. But they'll get that going for you. Related to that, I've visited a number of congregations that actually carry that year group idea through a little further. Everybody who joined in a given year sort of forms a small group ministry for the next year, for that year as they grow and for the next year. And that usually means a couple things. They get together 3 or 4 times a year, potluck dinner, go out to the theater, just go out together, enjoy each other's company, get to know each other a bit. And what I thought was really fascinating, they pick a project that the group wants to give the congregation. They do something that they'll either raise some money for or do some sweat equity. It's a gift from the class of 2014 to the rest of the group. Really an interesting little concept here. It's self-directed. If you have a mentor, they work with them to sort of help them figure out some things the congregation might need. But a really nice hands-on approach. I think that works very well. The farm team system, I mentioned that just a little bit in recruiters. Let me just expand on both of those for just a moment here. The farm team idea is, I grew up in a baseball town, so this is a metaphor that makes sense to me. It may not ring for a lot of people here, but the farm team idea says somebody comes in and you have recruiters, people whose job it is in the congregation, not tied to any specific function or committee, but general function is, let's look for talent. Be looking for people who could really become pillars of this congregation if they'd like to, and we give them an opportunity to do that. But look for raw talent. And let me just walk you through how we do this on the stewardship end. You find somebody like that who's just looks like they've got a lot of talent and say, could I interest you in serving on the finance committee for, say, a couple of years? And when I ask you that, I'm ready to lay out for you a little description that says, this is what this group does. These are kind of the skill sets we're looking for and how they spend their time and about how much time it involves. And this is what it accomplished for the congregation. Seemed to me you'd be a pretty good fit for that group, and they're looking for a new member this year. Would you be interested in serving on that? So they go do 2 years on finance. And then the mentor or the nomination, the leader development team comes to them and says, gosh, you've done great work. And if you'd like to continue doing that, that's fine. But I'd like to suggest to you, you might want to take a break, get a change of pace, either take a year off or switch over to an allied function. You've been working on finance, basically how do we spend our money. How about coming over and spending a couple of years over in stewardship, where we raise the money, or spend a couple of years on the endowment committee. And then, a couple of years later, you have that same conversation around. So over the period of about 6 years, and we usually don't think that way in UU congregations. Long-range planning is usually next Thursday. But if you track people and encourage them to move around a bit, at the end of 3 rotations, I've got somebody now who's absolutely conversant on income and outgo. They understand fundraising. They understand financial management. They understand the particular responsibilities of an endowment. Now, that's somebody I'd like to have on my board or my program council a couple years down the road. And you can do the same sort of thing with caring associates, with membership, through the social justice ladder, if you will. But the idea is intentionally using membership as part of a suite of skill sets that you want people to develop so they can be broader leaders for the congregation, and they understand what membership does besides just greeting people here. And one last item, I'm a big fan of testimonials. We use them in the stewardship area all the time. And most of you have seen stewardship testimonials, why I contribute. A lot of good congregations also use that opportunity for somebody to stand up for about a minute and a half, 2 minutes, and just say what being a part of this congregation means to me, what it means to my family, and why I'm just so glad I'm a part of this. It has nothing to do with money. It's just this is an important part of my life, and I wanted to share that with you. 2 caveats on that. If you want to do testimonials, and I think they're terrific, but somebody has to take responsibility for managing those so they're done well. A testimony that is poorly delivered by someone who's really not comfortable speaking in public and rather got coerced into it, or one they're having such a good time, their 2-minute testimonial is now running 5 or 6 minutes, that the minister is looking for a hook to get them off the stage so they get back on with the service, which has now lost its rhythm. So there's a management aspect here, and if you want to do these, you have to work very closely with your minister and make sure they fit and they're done at a proper time. But my original home church that I grew up in about 100 years ago, that's what we did at the chalice lighting. You had about a minute to talk about something that was important to you about being a member of this congregation. And sometimes during pledge season in particular, people said, I just wrote the biggest check I've ever written in my life for our Catholic campaign. It made me feel good, and here's why I did it. But a lot of times it was, we had a really tough year last year. We lost one of our children, whatever. This congregation literally saved my life. This was my community. Having people regularly stand up and say, let's just be quiet for a moment and reflect on how fortunate we are to be part of this community is very powerful stuff. So I encourage you to think about using those as well, please. So let's talk just a little bit, if we could, about feedback. Big fan of the obvious. Don't take anyone for granted. Just because you haven't heard from people doesn't mean that they're not happy. On the other hand, if you're going to ask for inputs, you need to be able to tabulate that and share people what the results are. There's no point in asking if you're not going to act on it, if you're not going to share the results. Now, everything I just said is true, but I'd be cautious about polls and general surveys. You're not running a restaurant here or a popularity contest, so this is not just how you think the Sunday services are going. This needs to be a much deeper process of talking about how we doing as a community. What's working for you here? What are you concerned about? What are you happy about? A little appreciative inquiry. What makes you joyous about coming up here on a Sunday morning or a Wednesday night? But a more thoughtful process than simply taking a poll and check 1 through 5. You think this is going well or not. But a really good process of talking to people from time to time in small groups and individually and getting that temperature of the congregation. A lot of committee on ministry do this very well in conjunction with the membership team. Gives you a really valuable feel for how things are going here. And that takes us to some of the useful approaches we talked about here. Having committee on ministry or the membership or jointly together doing a really in-depth, detailed survey with folks. Usually that's done online is one tool that's useful here. Some congregations do what I've referred to as the fall call. They have a membership and a stewardship team go out together in a tag team sort of thing. Talk about your annual pledge, talk about some volunteering opportunities, and see how you're going. See what people think. How are you feeling about the congregation as a whole these days? Is there anything that's not being met? Not, how well do we do this or that? Is there something we're not doing you'd like to see us do? That sort of thing. The last item in this block here, the 6x6, is the item I mentioned that one of the congregations in Pennsylvania came up with that I just thought was terrific. I've used it a time or two in my own congregation. We haven't institutionalized it as well as I'd like for it to, but here's the short version of it. And some of you may have heard of this before. They've made a list of just about every volunteer opportunity you can imagine in a congregation. If you really sit down and start doing that, you'd be surprised how long that list is. They frequently go well over 100 opportunities, frequently up to 200 here. So every member, every year, at the start of the church year after ingathering, gets this form. And on one side, there are all those volunteer opportunities listed with a code. 01 is usher, 02 is serve at the coffee hour, 03 is be an RE assistant. They've all got some number assigned to them. On the back side of that form is a matrix, 6 across, 6 squares across, and 6 down. And at the start of every year, everybody is asked to pick 6 things they've never done before in the congregation that they'd be willing to do sometime in the year, and pick 6 months when you'd like to do those. For example, okay, I'd be willing to be an usher in March. I'd be willing to go with the kids on the trip to Boston this year when we do that in June, and I'd be willing to help on the annual grounds cleanup in September, so forth. Everybody turns that in. Everybody's encouraged. Don't just do the stuff you know. This is a chance to grow and learn something about the congregation. That list on the side that had all the 100 and something on there also had a point of contact. So if you weren't sure what that one really was, you could email or call somebody, give it a little thought, and see what you wanted to do. But everybody turned that in. Membership committee broke those things down and collated them and sent them to the people that own those particular functions with a mandate. When you get somebody's name, you have a week to get in touch with them. If you own that area, if I may use that term, you call them and say, I understand you're interested in ushering. You'd like to do it in March. I think we can probably do that. I just want you to know we're going to partner you up with somebody who's done it before, so they'll walk you through it. And thank you for volunteering, and I'll let you know about a month or 2 months out which weekend, and we'll make sure that works for you here. Really a nice solution. When I first talked to them, they said that pretty well wiped out their volunteer deficit, because it just got to be part of the culture. People just got used to signing up and doing something. And most of them were one-time things. You weren't joining something forever. That worked out here. I know we have a lot of membership professionals. We have some ministers on board here, so this should not be a shock to anybody. Leadership and management by walking around, my preferred method of leadership. It's hard to know what's going on in a congregation if you're just waiting for people to come tell you what's going on. I have visited some congregations where they had a system where a board member stood in a corner during the coffee hour. If you had an issue, you could bring it up to the board member. It works sometimes, but in my experience, by and large, that board member is about as lonely as those people with blue coffee cups. Much better to task the membership director, the board members, everybody else who's got a leadership function. Get out there and walk around and talk to people. Ask them how they're doing. Get a feel for how things are going. I spent my first year in the congregation I'm a member of now just walking in on committee meetings. Charter says all meetings are open. I took them up on it. I just walked around and did stuff. And the first time I served on the board, I did that religiously, if I may use that metaphor here. Just spent a lot of time going to where people are, where they're doing things on the campus here, rather than expecting them to come to you and tell you what's going on. And I think most of you are familiar these days with the lexicon of adaptive leadership, the idea of standing on the balcony. You as leaders who have responsibility for a portfolio, you are part of that congregation, but you also have to be able to step back just a little bit. The indoor version, standing on the balcony. The outdoor version is listening in the conversation in the parking lot. I know we've had a great Sunday service. If I come to the second service and there are still 10 people in the parking lot talking about that service from the first service here, I know we had a really good service and people are talking and feel energized. So the idea of walking around and don't just look for formal feedback, but really taking the temperature in lots of different ways will certainly do well for you.
Hey, Bill, this is Mark.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. We did have one request to ask if you could briefly describe the matrix again in terms of how many cells there are. So there might be a few people that aren't clear on it. And I know we're watching our time, but if you could do that briefly,
sure,
that would be great.
If I'd been a smarter guy, I would have put a copy of that up here. But if you can just imagine piece of paper, just a standard piece of paper or a card, if you will. And on one side, there are about 3 or 4 columns. And the title of that page says, opportunities to serve or volunteer in the congregation. And you just list all those things. On the back side, imagine a crossword puzzle, but no black and white. It's just 6 squares across and 6 down, filled all the way in. So a total of 36 squares. And at the top, there's a blank spot. It has your name and how to contact you. And the card says, all the way down the left side, those first 6 columns, put a number in here for the thing you'd like to do. And then in the intervening boxes going to the right here, those represent 6 months. It could be any 6 months of the year. So at each one of those items where you said, I would like to do this in the first column, go to the right and pick, say, the first empty column here. Say, all right, 03, I'm going to be an usher, and I want to do that first. So the very first column to the right of that, I'll put March of 2015 in there. The next column down in the first blank says I'm going to make coffee. And so for that one, you'd want to go to the second column to the right and say, I'll do that in June. So what it looks like, if you can imagine 36 squares, all the way down the left side, you have 6 items I'd like to do. And then on the other side, it looks like a stair step. There's something in the first column to the right after the first column here. And then you move 1 to the right going all the way down. So you have a total of 6 things you're going to do, each of them one time over the course of a year. You pick any month you'd like to do here. Does that clarify? Or yeah, and I'll Mark. Let's see. Is this going to be in the Surge library?
The webinar?
Yes.
Oh yeah. It'll be on the Surge website, and I'll be sending it to everybody who's registered as well.
Okay. Well, what I can do, I've got a copy of this handy. I can send it to you if you want to forward that to everybody that you're going to send the slides to, and we can add it onto the slide pack as well. I've got got instructions and shows you a sample how to do it. But it's a very handy tool. It gets people out of their shell.
Okay, great.
All right. And by the way, when you get that, if you've got some contact data from me on here toward the end, if you have any trouble figuring that out, please feel free to just shoot me an email or give me a call. I'll be more than happy to work through it. All right, let's talk about termination. People do leave congregations for a lot of reasons. UUs have a particular problem. Sometimes we don't realize somebody has left. We don't do a very thorough check-in sometimes here. So part of that is having people who sort of keep track. Has anybody seen so-and-so lately? Do we know how so-and-so is doing here? I have a friend who's a deacon in an AME Zion, a big AME Zion church in Washington, D.C. They have a system I'm really envious of. All their ushers look like bouncers. They're all like 6'5", 300 pounds. You do not get in their sanctuary if you're not wearing your name tag. And the reason they do that during the service, they have a little form. They check which name tags haven't been picked up. And if a name tag hadn't been picked up in about 3 weeks, somebody just calls to make sure you're okay. That sounds a little intrusive for our blood here, but the basic idea is pretty good. You ought to just be looking out for each other. If somebody hadn't seen somebody, ask around. I do that about once a month. I haven't seen somebody. I just call, I haven't seen you at church. I just check it. Are you okay? And you'll find sometimes people aren't okay, and you'll find sometimes they actually left the church a month ago. They just didn't tell anybody. Sometimes it's a slow departure if they're leaving because they're not happy about something. I call this the Cleavon Little model. I don't know how many of you saw the Mel Brooks movie, Blazing Saddles. There's a scene in there where Cleavon Little is surrounded by bad guys, and I'm going to change the dialogue a little bit here, but he pulls out his own pistol and puts it up to his head, and he says, "Stand back, or the sheriff's going to get it." Sometimes people depart sort of like that. They're giving us little hints that they're not happy, but they don't articulate what's going on here. And so as membership people, it's worth taking a look. If people's body language just doesn't look right, if they used to be gregarious, but they come into service less often now and they go straight home, be looking for those little signs and don't be shy about asking, how you doing? Is everything okay? You may not be able to make everybody happy, but you ought to know when something's going on here. I'm a big fan of exit interviews. No matter why somebody left, I think it's a perfectly legitimate thing for the membership committee to get in touch with somebody. If you left just because you're moving, that's fine. We're going to miss you, but I really appreciate the opportunity. What did this church mean to you? What did we do well for you here? Is there anything that would have made the community more valuable or more helpful to you? Or the things that you just really enjoyed that we could make sure were reinforced? And if they're leaving for a reason, you're not trying to persuade them to come back. They're going to make their own decision here, and I would never promise anybody. And I've had these conversations when I was on our membership team here. I'm sorry you're leaving us. I'd appreciate if you wouldn't mind sharing with me what went through your mental process. What were you thinking? Why did you decide to leave us? Is there anything we could have done as a congregation that might have inclined you to stay here? We realize every congregation is not a fit for everybody, but if there's anything you could share that might help us be a better congregation, I'd appreciate that. We very seldom ask people that. Often it's something you can't do anything about. You really can't make everybody happy, and some people come to us out of a other religious tradition or no religious tradition and figure out after a while, this is too hard to work. I need more structure. I need more guidelines. And so this just doesn't fit for them, but that's okay. But you need to know that. One of the first things when I visit a congregation on one of our, what we call the Next Steps weekend, it's a measurement of how things are going generally. Inevitably, when I sit down with the membership team, I'll ask, so how are things going? Really good. We got 20 new members last year. Boy, that's true. That is good. How many people left and why did they leave? Silence. We often don't know how many people left. We don't track that. Stewardship people tend to because they know that's a pledge that's gone. But very often the membership team really doesn't know how many people left and don't have any idea why they left. You've got sort of an open barn door and maybe a broken process if you're not trying to ask those. So I encourage you to do that. Not everybody's going to talk to you. You're not going to know what everybody is leaving. But to the extent you can capture those lessons learned, sit down as a membership team, maybe once a year and say, let's kind of go over why people left here. Is there anything we can do? But somebody has to own that process, or it doesn't happen here. And just sort of a closing note on the termination piece. I'm a retired Army officer, and we were used to people coming and going a lot. An important part of our tradition is what we call hails and farewells. On the drop of a hat, we'd stop and have a little party and welcome the new people, and we made darn sure we took a minute to say goodbye to the people that were leaving us because they were an important part of our lives and our community. My experience is, we do a pretty good job of welcoming the new people. We're sometimes kind of haphazard about the farewells. We're often not as good as we could be about saying, this is so-and-so's last Sunday or one of their last Sundays, and, this is for people that are leaving, not because they're mad, but because they're moving, their jobs relocated or something of that sort here. But taking just a minute in a very public way to say, we were richer because you're here and we're a bit poor because you're leaving. We hope you'll always consider this your home congregation and stay in touch, and we hope to see you back in here. It's a really nice thing to do. And for the new member, that tells you, boy, you get value here from the minute you get here to the minute you leave and even after that. So it's a very nice holistic way to do that. This is the best part of the thing. I'm going to shut up here for a minute and ask you if I raised anything that causes the hairs on the back of your neck to stand up, causes any concerns, or have you got any really good success stories that we haven't talked about on the chat board here, or any maybe unintentionally funny occurrences, or any tips or techniques you'd like to share with the group here? If anybody's got anything you'd like to share, if you'd just hit your mood and hand raise and let Mark know, I'd appreciate hearing from you.
So this is Mark. So if you'd like to participate, again, just raise your hand, and I'll be happy to call on you. Some people are, as what happens in webinars, Bill, some people prefer to communicate via the chat box, so you might want to read that.
Sure. No, absolutely. We've got that. And let's see, let me get a little further down here. I'm still looking at Michelle's good comment here. I'm sorry, let me go through some admin things while we got here. Somebody has asked if slides are available after the presentation. I think we've covered yes, they will be, and we'll add the 6x6 to it. A couple of folks asked that. Mark says he's going to send a link to everybody for the recording as well. If you want the slides, send Mark an email, and he'll be good enough to send them through you here. Someone says we do a survey monkey survey 2 months after their first visit and a phone call on the 1-year anniversary. That's a really good process. That's very intentional. I like that. Mark has asked what percentage of people respond to the survey. About 40%. That's pretty good here, actually. That's good. What percentage of those stick? And somebody highly recommends job descriptions and term limits. Yeah, let me talk a bit about that while we're coming on here. I absolutely agree. One of the things I spend a lot of time in congregations, before I come to visit you, one of the things I'll ask for is your bylaws and your charters, and I'll generally ask for job descriptions for some key positions. If you don't have those and you're wondering why you're having trouble recruiting, well, we have the germ of a good conversation right there, don't we? People need to know what they're coming in for, and boy, particularly in the last couple of years, I find very few people who are really interested in joining a committee. A lot more people are interested in joining a task force that says, we have a specific project that needs to get done. Here's what needs to be done. Here's the timeline. Here's the skill sets we need. I have a lot of people who sign up for those and will eventually migrate to a committee once they've got their feet wet a little bit. But if you're just asking somebody to join a committee that says, we kind of do this area and we meet about once a month, boy, you're not going to get a lot there. And term limits are a terrific idea. I visited a congregation out in the Midwest a few years ago that had a sunset committee. And that committee's job was to go to the person who had been doing something forever and apparently had no intention of ever giving it up and saying, we thank you for your service. You've done yeoman's work. We're going to honor you at the Sunday service, the third beginning in March. Put your notes together. We'd like very much to tap your talents into something else and bring that with you. Your term is finished here. For most people, that's not really a problem. Most people wind up serving too long because they can't find a replacement. I've gotten in the habit of recommending to people, add to every committee charter, one of your responsibilities, bring one new member in every year, whether you think you need them or not. And so as you get some fresh blood on an automatic basis, the leader can look at somebody who's just really been toiling for a long time and say, boy, you just not. Why don't you take a year off? If you'd like to come back, that'd be great. But why don't you just enjoy being a member sitting in the pew on Sunday for a few months and catch your stress? And I'm really grateful for the idea of somebody mentioning the term limits. What happens so often are really good, dedicated people don't know when to stop. And they just drop from exhaustion. Now you've got a burned out leader and you have a function that has no one covered. So much better to say, I'd like for you to be on this committee, but you're not going to do it more than 3 or 4 years. We'd like for you to be the chair, but you're not going to do this for more than 2 years. That's hard to do, but if you don't start doing it, it'll just never happen here.
Bill,
yeah.
I'm keeping my eye on the clock just in the interest of time. Let me play moderator for you and you can respond. Please. So Kim from Washington Crossing said, one thing I'd add, we do a talk and tour 2 times a month for visitors led by a lay member, a quick tour around the building to get folks comfortable and a way to meet another member.
Terrific. That's very good. Yeah, and I like that. We do that as well. And by the way, you normally have, you don't have membership committee talk membership. You don't have stewardship talk stewardship. You have regular members talk about those functions. But yeah, the tours are that's great. Okay?
Yeah. And Lori, my friend Lori from Des Moines said it's a great program, but you cut out at the beginning when you were explaining the title. So can you quickly repeat what my membership myopia means?
Oh, yes, thank you. Yeah, the membership myopia refers to the fact that so many people in congregations, when you ask them, what's the membership portfolio? What does the membership committee do? They think it's just about greeting visitors and getting them to sign the book and not realizing there is a whole life cycle of other things that need to do. So it's getting people to get out of that myopic vision of just looking at that one function and thinking about.
Great. And so Eileen from PA, and I did see Karen has her hand up, so hang in there, Karen. We're just launching a capital campaign. How much should we expect of brand new members?
Oh, interesting one. That's a good one here. I've got about 3 capital campaigns going right now. That's a 2-part answer, actually, and it really a lot depends on what what it is you're building, how much you're spending, and how long they've been a member. But my philosophy is, look, if you're a full-up member, you have joined, you signed the book, and you're pledging, as a new member, you have the most at stake in what you're going to live with what we're building more than anybody else. So I think it's perfectly appropriate to say you're a member, whether you've been here a long time or not. We're asking you to participate fully. Your key is probably going to be how engaged are they in the congregation. Most new members wind up and maybe below your average for about the first 2 or 3 years. Most new members light until about 3 or 4 years, and they've gotten engaged here. But I wouldn't do a separate category. I'd be very straightforward and said, we're doing this for the ages, and these folks who've been here for 30 years are not going to enjoy this for as long or as much as you are. So this is your opportunity to say, I really am a part of this congregation here, and I'm ready to put some roots down here.
Great.
But you'll have to take a look and see what they're pledging and what their activity level is being posted. That'll tell you what you got.
There's a couple of more comments I'll get to, but I want to hear from my friend Karen, who's in Birmingham. Karen, I'm going to unmute you. So you should be good to go now. Karen, you there?
Still shows her muted, I think.
No, not on my screen. Huh. Karen, you might want to try unmuting yourself then. So while we're waiting for Karen, Catherine from Lexington, Mass. One event we instituted last year is a community engagement fair.
Oh, excellent.
Yeah. Great.
That's
And,
yep.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Bill.
I was going to say just a closing note on that piece here. One of the things, it's true for everybody always, I suppose, but particularly for millennials, a much talked about group these days, but some of the comments I hear about millennials, my experience says are really true. They're much less interested in you as an institution and more interested in you as a community. And what is it what do you do? What do you deliver here that makes the world a better place? So, things like a community fair, boy, that just resonates with people right off the bat. That's great. That's really good.
Yeah. And then Catherine actually sent some additional information. Last year we instituted community engagement fair 2 times a year at a selected coffee hour. Each action team or committee was represented at a table. The goal was to let folks know. Mine is dropping off. What action teams are in the church, what they did, and have a list of short-term and or one-time tasks people could become involved with. Each time we've had sign-ups by long-term members and newcomers alike. It's just one other variable for outreach and has been both festive and fun, and an awful lot to type in the chat box.
Very good.
And then, Lori, we have restructured our talents and treasures survey to tie in with our 3 end statements so that people understand how every committee, task, etc. ties into our church mission.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah, that's good stuff.
I visited a congregation once who was talking a little bit about interconnectivity among volunteers, and they actually scattered people all around. Membership had people over in this corner, stewardship in the other, and they had them all run colored yarn to each other when they talked about their intersecting functions. And it was just, the whole congregation looked like a spider web at the end. It's great.
That's great. And then just to add one other thing from Lori, related to the engagement fair, they took a picture of the church, made it into a puzzle, and each activity you were involved with, you got a piece of the puzzle. Then everyone brought the pieces of the puzzle to a particular Sunday, and they all put their pieces into the puzzle to complete the picture. Those people in Des Moines, they are so creative, aren't they, Bill?
I tell you what, I'm going to steal that one wantonly also. That's just true. Mark, we did this backwards. We should have shut up an hour and a half ago and just listened to these guys.
These are great ideas. My home congregation, our minister, when he first came 6 years ago, had a picture of the church, the building, made into a puzzle. And then as each new member is brought into the congregation, they're given a piece of the puzzle. So the symbolism is obvious.
That's marvelous. I love that. That's great.
I still don't hear from Karen, and I'm sorry, Karen. I don't know why you're not able to come up. If you're on the phone, Karen, and press *6, that will unmute you. Maybe that will work.
We might be coming in.
Karen? You have to mute your computer speakers, though, if you're on the phone.
Well, I want to hear this, too. Birmingham's one of my favorite congregations. I spent some time with folks.
Yeah. Well, Karen used to work for the St. Lawrence District with us, and now she's the interim minister down there.
Very nice.
Karen, any luck? You can always get a hold of Bill after the webinar. Bill, I don't see any other hands up or any other comments.
Stunningly, we're just about on our time schedule here. Let me just give you a couple concluding thoughts here. I hope you carry out of this. I think the people who are on this call know this already, but your congregation has to understand membership and membership development has that whole lifecycle. It really is a team effort. Everybody does this. And so to the extent you can train your volunteers and your committee members to think of this as a system with a life cycle, that they'll do better, and we'll quit doing episodic sort of work here. I really do like the idea of rotating members through. My own congregation has got a system going now that it seems to be working pretty well for us. We've deputized a member from stewardship over to membership and vice versa. They go to every single meeting and they carry the notes back to the other one. Here's what they're doing. And we meet about 3 times a year. Those two committees meet together to share resources and ideas and talent. And you can do that on a drop of a hat. If somebody says, well, we need to get together with those guys. The idea of rotating people among those teams works out very well. You always understand on the greeting piece here, there's a real balance act. You want people to feel welcome. You want people to understand what's going on. You don't want to feel like they're getting smothered here. We generally err on the other side here. It's not too often somebody feels too smothered with us, but thinking about that. And then my last plea, membership is one of those areas where data really does count. And if you don't know where you've been, it's kind of hard to say where you're going or what your possibilities are going forward here. So just routinely, people in a lot of congregations publish a dashboard showing this graphically. It's a nice kind of thing over a given period. You pick a quarter, year, 6 months. How many people came to visit? How many visitors returned or what percentage? How many of them joined? How many people left, and a catalog of the top 10 reasons here. That's really useful data to have, and the whole leadership team doesn't have that. You don't really know what you got or what's going on with people. Okay, Lori has posted another, here we go. A few years back, we did an engagement fair. Okay, no, we got that one. Got that.
But also, Lori wanted to make sure people knew that the UU Association of Membership Professionals has periodic discussion groups on really great, important books. And the next one is December 17th on sticky teams. So you can get more information at uuamp.org.
Perfect. That's good. All right. Well, last item, when you get the slides, you'll get my contact information here. Again, I'm part of the stewardship team that works with the Congregational Stewardship Network. We work with everybody from congregations up to the UUA staff. That's the stuff we do in the middle here. But like I said, membership's really a core interest of me as well. That's our office email on there, but there's my billclontz@me.com, not hard to remember, or my UUA address. If there's anything I can do for you, if there's any questions I can answer, it comes out of today and it pops up later, feel free to give me a call or shoot me a line. I'd be happy to get back to you. If you're interested in stewardship, I run a blog called Stewardship for the Rest of Us. gets updated mid-month every month, and we frequently talk about membership and other areas there as well. So I'll commend my own writing to you. How's that for hubris? Mark, I think I've done all the damage I can do, and we're within 5 minutes of time here.
Well, it was a great presentation, Bill, and the accolades are pouring in. So thank you. And thank you, everyone, for participating on the chat and for being with us tonight. The recording will be on its way to you as soon as my good Surge colleagues are able to put it up on the Surge website. I'll send you a link to it. And again, if you want just the slides, I've already gotten a couple of requests. Just email me, and I'll be happy to send that to you as well. So thank you all.
Mark says I'll send you that matrix, and you can forward that to the folks who asked for the slides as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. Thank you, Bill, and thank you, everyone. Good night.
Thanks, everyone. I learned a lot from you guys. Great tips. Thank you.